Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to my podcast that I just recently started. This is Colleen. For everyone new here, she was one of the artists featured in the last video, and you guys had a lot of questions for her, so she...
Yeah, it was just so cool.
She pleasantly agreed to meet with me and kind of talk through her practice and tell you a little bit more about it. So, Colleen, I'll pass it over to you if you can tell us a little bit more about your practice and who you are and all that.
Okay, so this is Lulu, by the way. And so, yeah, I've been an artist my whole life, but not just, I've always wanted to make art, but I studied to be an architect, and then in sort of my late 30s, I started to teach school at OCAD University in Toronto, and I teach design and architecture at the school. And then I always made art, but it was when it was convenient, which wasn't very often. And I'd take classes, like I used to do a lot of life painting, and I would take classes and in order to make sure I made art, but it never seemed to, I never had time. Let's just say I just never had time, probably like everybody. And then during COVID, at the beginning of COVID, obviously I had more time. I was still teaching and still able to practice architecture, but there was more time. Suddenly I wasn't driving back and forth to Toronto. I live in Hamilton, so it's an hour or two to get to work. And so all that time wasn't being wasted. And I was like, I need to make art. And maybe it was coping as well, but I needed to make more art. So I decided that what I was going to do, I don't know, I must have read something, but what I was going to do is I was going to spend an hour a day making art, and it was going to be the first and most important thing after, I would get up, and I always journal every morning and have my cup of coffee, do a few little exercises. So that takes like an hour, and then I would do art, and I would put it in my book and no one could take it away from me. And then I would go for a walk, and I would walk with my friend Mary. And during COVID, that was pretty easy because I would just block it out in my calendar. If I had to teach, obviously I had to teach, but so it turned out like 5-6 days a week I could protect that. But so ever since, I've put it in my calendar, and at the university they like to make meetings for you, right? And they just look in your calendar, see if you're busy. So it took me a while, but I figured out I had to stick it in my calendar, and I didn't tell anybody what it was. Like if I said, well, I need to do my art and go for a walk, they'd be like, well, too bad, right? Or they wouldn't say it, but I knew that's how they would feel. So I just would block it out, and I said, oh, I'm busy. I'm busy. And everybody at the school has a practice of some sort, so I would just sort of insinuate it was my practice, which it was,
For
right?
sure.
So what happened is I started to do that hour a day, sort of minimally 5 days a week. And it was like, no one is going to take this away from me. And anyway, so I started producing all this art, which was kind of wild. I didn't realize at first because it just felt like, but then now I look back to the beginning of COVID, and the amount of work that I've generated has been kind of wild. Like it's all over the house, of course.
So every room has it everywhere.
Yeah, and I feel a little bit obnoxious about the fact that my art is all over the house. But I do try to get other people's art and do that kind of stuff, and I sell some of it as well. But
I like to say that it's a form of storage.
Yeah, it's a form of storage, yes.
Otherwise it's in boxes, right? It's like the walls, it's free storage.
That's the thing. And I like to paint I like to do my artwork on wood, so a lot of people say, well, you should just paint the canvas and then do something else, but it doesn't work with wood, right?
Definitely.
Because anyways, I'm sure I don't know. I feel sorry for my kids, eventually they'll have to deal with it all, but maybe they can manage. I'm not going to worry about that. But so that's kind of me. So I still teach, obviously, but I talk to my students about my art, even though I teach architecture and design. It's all integrated, and my art is very much about buildings and nature, like the two things together, and I particularly like older buildings. So those things, and nature, and I'm very much about sustainability when it comes to architecture, and sort of I teach a course, and I teach, all of my courses have it, but I teach a specific course about sustainable design and architecture and so on. And to me, in my head, that completely is attached to my artwork, because it always has something to me, nature is sort of the beauty of, the basis of beauty comes from nature. And I tell my students that they're responsible for creating beauty and comfort. And that to me comes from the main tenets of nature, right?
Totally.
So it's just so integrated, although it just feels accidental. And I years ago, when my mom passed away, I did a eulogy, and I suddenly realized when I was writing it that my mom had spent her whole life trying to create beauty, right? And she had this wonderful garden, she had this wonderful house, not necessarily my style, but a wonderful house, and she created these family events, and she was an artist in the sense that she made these beautiful quilts, and she was always making and creating beauty. And to me, that's a real, I kind of see myself that way. It doesn't always work out, but that's a responsibility. Like if you can, because a lot of times I'm talking too much maybe, but a lot of times I think, you know, what's the point of making art? Because you get to that place where you're like, well, why am I doing this? It's just laying around the house, you know, what's the point of this? But if somebody sees it and enjoys it and it makes them think about something, then I take that as a huge win, like in a sense.
Yeah.
Like a friend of mine once said to me, I was walking at the Royal Botanical Gardens and I saw something. I thought, oh my God, that would be something Colleen would want to paint, and it was so neat and blah, 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 blah. And I just was like, oh my God, like that was so great.
Yeah.
Somehow something had caused her to see something that she wouldn't, and she, you know, she's very aware and so on, but she saw something that she might not have seen otherwise. So if I can do that, then to me that's huge. Like that is, so if people can look at my artwork and sort of see buildings the way I see them, then not that the way I see them is the only way, but they can see something that makes them understand the world or grow. Maybe grow is the thing, right? So.
And I think that like you're able to capture again like these like older buildings too, which I find have way more character, way more warmth, right? And in a day when we have so many like modern buildings that are very clean slate.
Yeah.
I don't like anything modern. I'm an older,
do you not?
I'm with you on the older buildings. But I find that now it's like, you know, you're able to build something, I guess in architecture, right, on the outside, and then your art is on the inside of a house, right? So now it's like you're bringing outside and inside of adding beauty. And I love what you said about the like adding beauty to just everywhere, right? And
to the world.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to like look at your art too.
Well, if you can make someone else's life just a tiny bit better, right? Or
totally.
Like what's the point of being here otherwise? Like if you can let other people sort of just have a moment of comfort, and it's a difficult time. We're not in an easy time.
For sure.
You know, and so, not that probably any time is easy, but you know, yeah, I think as artists, like in your art is pretty wonderful as well. Like you sort of look at it and you're like, oh, you know, you sort of see things that you may not have intended, I may not have intended. You know, you make people see things, right?
Totally.
I think that's so fabulous. Right?
Yeah, totally. And I think in your practice too, you bring in a lot of different things, right? Like I know we've basically looked at some of your work, but you have the like, you know, gold foil and copper foils, and then you also have like painting, and also you know, there's so many different layers to it. Do you want to talk a little bit more about like you know, all the things that go into one piece?
Right. So part of it comes from this idea that I've sort of thought about for years and years, is that the reason I think I like old buildings, so we're in a house that's from the 1880s, and it's all wonky, the floors are wonky, the windows are wonky, all this kind of stuff. The thing that I like about these old buildings is that you know that people have been there and they've affected it, and they've left a patina, right? So my living room floors are all scraped up, and like there must have been dogs in this house, like there is now, like for 140 years, right? And they've left little marks. And those little marks, not just the dogs, but the people and everybody else, and the sadnesses and the great things that happened, and they leave them like almost a psychological mark on a building in my head. And you can see some of them, but you don't necessarily see all of it. But it's a patina. And so these older houses have this patina, whereas maybe you see a house in the suburbs that was just built. That patina is not there because people have not lived their lives. Like it hasn't, maybe in 50 years or 80 years, that patina will come because people will start to renovate, they'll paint it different colors, they'll add trees, you know, so the patina slowly develops. But anyway, so I think that's why I've almost always lived in an old house, and it's that patina. And to me, there's always this sort of ghost quality, you know. And I think so this one here is a school in downtown Hamilton that I've always liked. It's right across from the General Hospital. It's this beautiful old school. I think they've made it into condos now, but the school is beautiful. And I found this great picture of these kids, and they just look like tough little guys from the Victorian era. And I'm putting them together in a sense, like, to me, they're kind of like the ghosts, like they're acting in this case as the ghosts that have been involved in that building. And of course, with some of my other paintings, I had a carriage in front of one painting, and I have these two Victorian ladies in front of another house, and I kind of ghost them in because to me, they're kind of they've left a patina, or poetically, I don't know them, but there's that idea that there's something there that we're attached to through our grandparents or our grandparents and so on. Like, there's this story that's passed down, and these lives that have passed down that are embedded. And I did a bunch of research at the library about the history of this area, so I've done a lot of research on my house and some of the areas so sometimes in a few of them, I have this list of all the people who lived in this area in the 1850s, and it's like a census kind of thing, and it's handwritten, of course, and it's beautiful writing, and I sort of gel transfer it into some of the paintings to get it more information, or sometimes I'll find old maps and I'll do that or something. But this idea of the layers, you know, sort of building up, that it, like, if you look at you'll never understand all the things that happen, but there's a huge richness, and it's that richness that I think is so fascinating. Whereas you look at how, I think, to cast aspersions upon suburbia, like you just, like, that richness is not there. And, you know, you hope that it will be eventually, and I suspect it will be eventually, although we can talk about the architecture. It's a whole different thing. But I think that richness is really what I'm trying to say, you know, that we're not just us, we're all the people that came before us, and we're in a space where other stories have been, and that's something to be valued, I guess. Maybe that's just it, that, you know, to sort of say, oh my God, you know, so many wonderful things have happened in this place, and sadnesses and everything else, right?
For sure.
So, yeah.
And I love to, my family lives in England as well, so they, you know, we go to the pub all the time, and one of them is like from like the 1400s, and it's just so interesting to think that, like, you know, life wasn't that different is kind of an interesting thing with like older buildings, I find too. It's like, we're all doing the exact same thing that people were doing like 500 years ago, basically, right? Like, it's so interesting to think about, like, same with a house, right? We all had to live somewhere, and, you know, same with those like shops and stuff, and like the function of society hasn't changed like that much in a sense of, like, our buildings can still host the same activities years and years later. It's kind of interesting to think about too.
And also the same things, like, people fell in love, people had children, people lost, you know, loved ones, people struggled, and they survived, and, you know, all those same things happened, right? For sure. And you know, and then those people are gone, and we don't know anything about them. Like 400 years ago, we don't know anything about them, but we know that they were there. They left, you know,
their mark somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I just find it really fascinating. Yeah,
for sure. Things. So let's get into, like, the nitty-gritty of your pieces. I know you like to work on wood. What was the inspiration behind that versus, I guess, paper or canvas and those sorts of things?
Well, I like wood because it's natural, whereas canvas feels kind of, or looks synthetic to me. And so what I try to do is find pieces of plywood, and sometimes it's found plywood, and sometimes I just go to good old Home Depot and buy plywood. But I like it because it brings, it's just it's nature, like, it's wood, you know, and I guess that's kind of what it is for me, like, just that sort of element of it. Yeah.
I like that. And then I know that you do gel transfers as well here. Do you want to talk a little bit about that process for you?
Sure. So the one thing that people sort of get mixed up is gel transfer versus jelly plate, right? So this is not jelly plate, which is pretty cool too. I don't do that. What I do is something called gel transfer. So what I do is I'll take something like a photograph, and I have a ridiculous number of photographs because wherever I go, I take pictures of houses or trees. That seems to be the other one. Anyways, so I have, like, I'll find an image, like this image of this building I really liked. So I always print it off of my own printer. Like, I don't go to Staples or something to print because their printing is too perfect and the paper they use is higher quality. So you want to use a really low quality paper because it comes off easier. Right. But what I do is I print whatever I want to do, and then I will cover this, like I'll cover the print itself with gel, like just a matte medium of some sort. And I use matte medium. I've used other things, but it seems to be the best one for me. And then you put it down on top of the surface, like upside down. And before I do it, I actually have put gel. Like when I start this, I would put gel on the whole thing just to seal it, so that because with the wood it's a little bit more porous, right? Yeah. So I do that and I let it dry, and then I do this where I paint my photograph with gel, and I'll paint the surface again, and then I'll attach it like that, and then I'll like rub it so that there's no bumps, right? So you can see here, like the building has been gel transferred under, so these are just pieces I'm working on right at the moment. But the whole building has been gel transferred on there. And then once it's on there, you let it dry, and you can let it dry just for 20 minutes, but the longer you let it dry, the more intact the transfer will be. So although I have to admit, I like the damage.
Yeah. No,
I like the,
again, it gives you character, right?
It's a texture, right?
Yeah.
It creates, because you can see down here, there's little bits of damage and so on. And actually in this one, I painted white underneath sort of a square to try and make the gel transfer a little brighter. But anyway, so I wait like 24 hours usually to get a better transfer. And then I just wet it. Like I just wet it with a cloth. Like I'll just take a rag and I'll just wet it a little bit at a time. And then you start rubbing off the paper. And eventually what happens, usually you have to sort of do it once, let it dry, and do it again. Mm-hmm. Until you can't feel the texture. So like up here, you can't really, there's probably little bits left, but almost all the paper is gone and it just leaves the ink, mm-hmm. right? And you can see, so for this one, obviously it's bigger than 8.5 by 11. So what I did is I've printed it in pieces. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, maybe something like that. And you can see the joints here. So I would take the 2 pieces, say this was, and I would tape them together on the back like this. And then I would sort of gel transfer this one, then I would do this one, and then this one, and so on. And then once I have them all in place, and I'm fine if they don't perfectly align. Like, and again, to me, that's kind of like the patina. It just like one more sort of imperfection, which is so cool, right?
Yeah.
Like if it was perfect, then why not just take a photograph?
Yeah, totally. I
agree
with that.
And then once I've got that done, I gel it again to protect it. And then I start quite often to paint into it or add. So this is a gel transfer here of trees, but it's on top of a paper.
Right.
So I initially put this paper down, which I quite liked. And so I buy a lot of papers from the Japanese paper store or from the paper store in Toronto. And then I gel transferred on top of it. So the combination of the gel transfer and the paper. So you can see here, that's just the paper. Whereas here's the gel transfer on top of the paper. So it has, again, you're putting things together. And this is the other thing that I really love about it is the accidents. Like you cannot predict. You just can't predict.
Happen.
Yeah, at all. So that's kind of my process, I guess.
For sure. And how did you develop this style? Because obviously the architecture part makes sense, but then how did you move to, this type of medium?
Yeah. Well, so in 2010, I had a sabbatical from work, and I took an art thesis at McMaster, and they one of the instructors was very much into printmaking, and so I took a class in printmaking, and gel transfer was one of them. So I really liked that. I really liked printmaking, and they had wonderful presses, and I was using plates and so on. I really enjoyed that, but I don't have a press, right? Although you can use them. There's a place in Hamilton Center 3 that you can go and use the presses. But gel transfer is a type of printmaking that you can do on your own.
For sure. Right?
And I just really enjoyed that fact that I could do it. I'm kind of an introvert and, on my own kind of person. But also, I like the transfer from photograph. Like I'm very much into taking photographs of things, and for a long time I was just doing nature, not buildings, and it just, because they're my photographs, not these boys, but the building are my photographs. I like that connection, and for it just works really well for gel transfer. So it's kind of a weird. You know how things are.
Having accident or whatever.
Yeah, because before that I was more about painting. I would paint life, and then I started to collage sort of / paint, and you just sort of move along and do different things.
Let's go back to where we were at the beginning. You were talking about the discipline and having an hour a day in the morning and a walk and stuff.
Yeah.
I know that you just said you got into it, but what made you, I guess, move to actually be like, I need this, setting your boundaries, and even coming up with that idea, because I think it's brilliant, obviously.
Oh, thanks. I'm sure I must have read it somewhere. I don't know. But I think it's just because of where I am with my life. So I had I practiced architecture with a huge commercial firm, and did massive, ridiculous buildings until I was in my 30s, and then I started teaching, and I had my kids, and then so my career kind of changed. So I started teaching. I developed my own practice. I did a lot of First Nations work in Ontario, and I did that sort of while my kids were growing up. And then I guess I got to a point where I was not happy with that balance. So it worked for me for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I never seemed to get to itch this art piece. And I remember my mom always used to say, "Oh, I think of you as an artist," and I'd be like, "Well, Mom, that's not what I'm doing." But I always had this thing. I knew I needed to do this, and I knew I had something that I had to flush out. I think everybody sort of has different gifts, right? And,
for sure.
And if you don't flush them out, it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
Right. I know.
Feel a pent up build up in your chest, right? Something's wrong.
It's very destructive.
Yeah.
And I think lots of people, I assume many people deal with that. And I know, for instance, if I wasn't making this art, I would be a very unhappy person. Mm-hmm. It would cause me damage. So I was sort of at that point where I wasn't frustrated or anything, but I knew I needed to make a change, and I was trying to step away to some extent from the architecture, because I knew I had to do something in order to make more art, because my time was full, right? I couldn't just sort of add it on top. So just through different things, I toned down the architecture. It's not completely gone, but it's substantially toned down. And I also stepped away from administration at the university, because I knew I had to make this change, right? Anyways, and that's kind of how it happened. It's hard to sort of excavate it, but I just knew. Also during COVID was I was a very fortunate person in COVID. I know lots of people suffered enormously, but I didn't, and luckily my loved ones didn't. So I didn't have to drive to Toronto anymore. So suddenly I had all this time, and I had space. I set up a studio at home. My partner worked with me, and at home we would sit around and work, and it was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Mm-hmm. But I knew that this was a fantastic opportunity to make this jump, because suddenly this time was given to me that I was spending driving back and forth. Mm-hmm. When you spend 4 hours driving back and forth in a day, it's absurd.
Yeah,
I just think, oh my God. Even taking the train was 2 hours each way.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Crazy. It's just crazy, right? And so suddenly I had this time, and I'm like, oh my God, and so this is the moment. So I guess, maybe that's where it came from. It's hard to really say.
Well, now I have all this extra time. What am I going to do with it, and how I'm going to be productive with it, or whatever, right?
But also, it was a place in my life where I knew my kids were adults, basically, and then like this was a time for another change. You know how you change every few years, so this was another sort of realignment moment.
And where do you see your practice, I guess, going in the future? I'd love to hear.
Well, so I don't know. I would like to do more, but I'm not sure how much I do really like teaching. There's some frustrations in the bureaucracy of it, but I do enjoy teaching. So my next thing is to try to figure out that balance, like whether. And I have like a show coming up at Mary's at the back alley gallery, but so those things are happening, but I know I don't put as much effort into them because I don't have the time to do that. So things are about, if I wasn't working at the school, then I would have more time, and I'm trying to decide
when's the time to leave, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, or should I? There's a lot of people who teach like into their late 70s, which maybe isn't the best idea. It depends on the person. I don't really want to be that person, to be honest. I'm not happy with the commuting, but I do like the interaction. So I'm trying to figure that out right now. But I guess my biggest concern about the art is not having the interaction. So I have to sort of figure out how to, like I maybe figure out how to teach maybe here in Hamilton, or teach. I've thought about teaching young, like kids, you know, which isn't really what I've done in my life, right? But somehow I need to build that next piece, because I don't see myself as someone sitting in my studio, you know, 10 hours, 8 hours a day, and just producing. That's not going to do it for me. I kind of see myself sort of entering the next third and likely last third of my life. But I want it to be really, you know, I want it to be full, and I want it to be full of art. I know it's going to be full of art, but I need it to be not just sitting at home making art. It has to be, but I'm not quite sure what that looks like.
Community or something, having a community at least, and that sort of thing.
Which is huge, and I find that at my point in my life, I really realize how significant that is.
For sure.
Like, it's massive. You don't really get that when you're younger, probably because it's around you more. But
naturally.
Yeah, but anyway, so I have to sort of figure out how to make that all happen. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment, trying to figure it out. But I know it's around art. I know it's about art. So.
That. And where can people find you if they want to see more of your art?
So it's Colleen Marion Reed is my Instagram, and I try to post videos of my process, which is a ton of fun for me, it's really interesting, because that's a piece that I'm really fascinated in. So I'm sort of interested in what you do, because although I'm not sure I could put that much effort into it that you do, but I really enjoy making those videos. So that's kind of fun. And then I have a website at colleenreed.ca, so Canada.ca.
Yeah.
So those are my two sort of locations. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
And then do you want to do a little tour of the art in your house? Would you
be
okay
sure
with that?
Yeah.
Walk around.
Yeah, in my messy old house.
Amazing.
This is kind of where I am right now. So this is the one I just finished, and it's 3-dimensional, and I'm sort of, again, the idea of the different layers and weaving the layers together, and I love the metallics, because it's sort of ghostly in a sense. To me, it's an unreal palette in a sense, you know. But also these buildings have copper and metals on them and so on.
Yeah, I love the windows inside. They really pop because of that metallic, right? Like,
the
really
metal behind them. So. Yeah, anyways, and you can see, like, this is a tree sort of thing, but I like the fact that the tree goes inside of the building, and like the idea of growth and growing, and which has always been kind of interest to me. So. Oh, there's this this one, but we already looked at that one when you did Mary's thing.
I love this one though. It's so nice.
So that's the same building as the one we just looked at.
Oh, it, oh
Right,
yeah.
except that little one is the 3-dimensional. And you can see here, that's the writing of, the census from the 1800s. So
I love that you bring that stuff into it too. Did you find those in like the library archives and stuff?
So they have all these, they have a huge collection at the library and they have all these microfiche, which is like ancient technology now, but they have these beautiful things. Yeah. And this is just a picture of the snow, I took somewhere, and I just kind of love how it, turns into anyways, it works.
Yeah, it looks so great. And I love this too. You have like this stippling, I guess, around
I do a lot of that. Maybe less now than I used to, but I love that idea of just like the little, it's very meditative. It's kind of funny. But, yeah.
little edges.
Yeah.
So cool.
There's one I really liked here, actually, that I did a while ago, of my son. And it's I just think it's kind of sweet. I just love the idea of the patterns. Like you can see the patterns of the water.
Yeah.
And I just if you just looked at that, you'd think, well, that's crazy stuff. But like in the wood behind, right? And this is my partner loves fountain pens, and he sort of got me into ink. And this was sort of, some of these are translucent, some of them are solid, and then it's all just little bits of patterns. And it's funny because this is sort of 3-dimensional as well, the idea of,
For sure. It's like an early point of your 3D career.
When you look at it, it sort of tells you where things are going to go. Right?
And I love this one too because you have so much like white space around it too, but it works so well. Like the balance is perfect, I feel like.
Yeah.
It's very satisfying to look at.
So I figure 50, probably 20, but if you get from the
There's a list here of all, there's 42 of us in my family, if you include all the grandchildren and partners and everybody else. So anyway, so they're all listed in there. And then there's 3 houses where they all lived, and 2 of them are wedding pictures, and one is a picture of my parents as 18-year-olds, and they just look so ridiculously cute. So I just, I made it one Christmas for my siblings and myself, and then I printed it and gave it to everybody. And you can see the sort of silver in here, so I'm already using some of that. And then there's maps. My grandparents lived in Perth County, and that kind of stuff, and even the papers, the Japanese papers, sort of starting to come in. And then this is a gel transfer of flowers, and obviously they are gel transfers, so just trying to bring that together, and I love that picture of my parents. It's just
so cute.
It is so cute. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so that kind of stuff. Like that one is sort of it's all echinacea. I don't know if there's enough light there, but again, it's all this sort of pointillism, and these are gel transfers in behind, some of them, and some of them are just drawings that I just did, and I just, you can see the dots. And
It's so cool. It's cool to see the evolution, right? Like you start with the plants, love the plants, and then add more.
And those are my kids.
It's so cute.
Yeah, they are.
It's cool that, again, like these two go so well together.
These are gel transfers up here. This is acrylic, of course. And there's a gel transfer in here, and then I wrote on here. And then these, you can see sort of jellyfish.
Okay,
those are actually prints. Like they're
so cool.
Prints, like lithographic prints, right? So it's quite a combination of. I did this when I was at McMaster, so that you can sort of see the precursors of where I am now. I guess. So it kind of.
And is it plexiglass?
There's sheets of plexiglass because I wanted that to. Originally, they at one point they had light behind them, and then at another point I had it at the McMaster Gallery just for the class show, and I had a screened video playing on top of it because it's kind of about a trip my brother and I did together after we gotten some bad news, and so we were driving through one of the states that's really green. I forget the name of it. Anyways, between here and North Carolina, and it was all during the night. We had to drive through the night, and it's kind of about that journey, and then these little jellyfish are sort of about the soul or the ghosts you know, which has sort of become the ghosts now in my, but the idea that we are sort of embedded in all of this landscape. What is the name of that state? Anyways.
Pull out the map.
It'll come to me eventually. But anyway, so this is kind of that story about that. And but it sort of shows you, and even these little patterns, like I really love these kind of little patterns from trees and different things. So.
I feel like you have that a lot in your work, the shadows, like which I love.
I totally love that. And even writing, like you can't necessarily read the writing very well, but it's kind of about that story, and I like the pattern that writing makes on things. So sometimes I try to embed, like the little list of the people who lived in the 1850s in my area. Like it's the same thing. You don't necessarily recognize it as writing, but it's another layer of depth, right? So
yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. So this is one of, because it's sort of dear to my own life. You know, so some artwork means more to you than other work.
Yeah, for sure.
So like I would never let it go because of that, right? But but I can sort of see it and sort of retrospectively look at, you know, this is where I'm going to go.